Good afternoon, everybody. This is a live emergency briefing as we have a tornado outbreak that's about to begin tonight and continue through the day on Tuesday. It looks like it's going to be maximized across the Texas Piney Woods into central and northern Louisiana. There is an enhanced risk that's already in place, including the threat of a strong tornado or two. And there's also a blizzard warning on the cold side of this event. And that blizzard warning is in red. There you can see from far northeastern Colorado into western Nebraska, western South Dakota as well. There is a little bit of a shadow there downwind of the Black Hills. It's going to be an issue as those northeasterly winds are coming over the terrain, heading down as more of a dry type of a flow. But you've also got this blizzard warning in northeastern Colorado as well that we need to keep an eye out. And let me make sure that this thing is even live. Experimenting with some new technology here. Thank you everybody for joining me. Tap that like button if you're interested in in-depth extreme weather analyses. But it looks like Denver is going to be right on the fence with this one, right on the western edge of the deformation zone, but all of it does depend on the exact track of that surface low that's expected to intensify tonight, move into northwestern Kansas, eventually into Nebraska, and the cold side of that system is where the blizzard is going to be happening. Tonight, there's a threat of tornadoes as well across the eastern Texas Panhandle. The 40s dew points into northwestern Kansas, even though you do have favorable kinematics, are probably not going to be supportive of a tornado threat as much up there, but you still could get supercells all the way up into northwestern Kansas. Mid-50s dew points, though, streams up into the eastern Texas Panhandle and into western Oklahoma, so I do think that there is a narrow window for an isolated tornado late night tonight, around midnight into the early morning hours, Clarendon out towards Shamrock, maybe down toward the Childress area. I'm going to be activating storm chase mode, of course. I'm flying into Dallas this evening, and I'm going to be able to decide whether I want to chase a nocturnal threat, southeastern Texas Panhandle, chase all night, chase the squall line through the DFW area, where there might even be an outside threat of a tornado or two at DFW tomorrow morning. But I think that the main threat of tornadoes is going to maximize across the Texas Piney Woods tomorrow afternoon, maybe a little bit further south down near the Sabine River, and it does include the I-20 corridor. It includes Shreveport. I-20 runs to the east of Dallas through Shreveport. Storm motion is going to be northeast at about 30 knots. Manageable storm motions despite very complex terrain from the Texas Piney Woods into central Louisiana. It is a relatively difficult place to chase because along I-20, you can just cruise from west to east to keep up with the storms. South of that, though, you've got more of the back roads. You have very tall pine trees out there, too, so it's difficult to gain visual of the storms. You definitely have to use your drone a lot out there over the complex terrain. You also could get some funneling of the moisture up the Sabine River Valley. So I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere south of Shreveport, northeast of Lufkin, prefrontal confluence lines are going to be the main mode. You're going to have a front that's going to sag down into the Texas Piney Woods. Normally when your low-level jet is parallel to that frontal boundary, that'll cause kind of strung out convection. The storms will have a difficulty moving off of that front and into the stronger wind shear, and usually you get less of a tornado threat. But a wrinkle in the setup is that with these prefrontal confluence lines, basically areas of converging air that are forced upward, these are factories of supercell storms, renegade supercells that are capable of producing tornadoes and even strong, potentially violent tornadoes tomorrow. There's a 10% hatch area for strong tornadoes across this zone, and it's going to be these prefrontal confluence lines that are going to initiate renegade supercell storms that are going to be able to move off of those and into that environment, a very strong low-level wind shear. This isn't your classic Dixie Alley setup where you have very favorable kinematics, a 50 to 60 knot low-level jet. You have kind of shallow critical angles. This one's kind of a combination of a southeastern Great Plains Dixie Alley setup where you do have that directional shear. You also have speed shear, but this is on the very southern edge of the low-level jet too. This is a consolidated non-tandem trough ejection. The last trough ejection had a little bit of a subtropical connection 1 year ago on the December 10 and 11 2021 outbreak. That picked up a closed low off Baja, Mexico, ripped it up in front of the trough. That's a tandem trough ejection where you can get much larger warm sectors, larger scale tornado outbreaks. This is just a single open wave that's ejecting from the southeastern Great Plains and lifting up toward the northern plains with blizzard conditions on the backside. So it is a little bit different than the tandem trough ejections that we often will see. So this is the HRRR, the 12Z HRRR, which shows you where the storms develop late night tonight. Of course, we're going to take a much deeper dive on the individual setups, and we're going to take a look at the latest models for the Denver snow zone too. It's going to be a very close setup for Denver, right on the western edge of the deformation zone, and it all depends on that exact track of the surface low. If you could prolong the window where the surface low passes to your south, that'll prolong those easterly winds up the terrain. That's orographic lift. That's where the heaviest snow falls. That's when you get pummeled in Denver and the Colorado foothills. But this track is a little bit further north for that, where it brings in the northwesterly winds that go down the terrain. You get subsidence, you get drying, and that will be a smaller window, Denver into the foothills, so you're not going to get those huge snowfalls of like 30 to 40 inches that a lot of times you'll get out there in the Colorado foothills. But let's go back to severe. And about midnight, 9-10 p.m., you get an eruption of supercell storms across the eastern Texas Panhandle. Weaker squall line moves through DFW Metroplex about 7 or 8 p.m. And then this is your outbreak. Sabine River, Texas Piney Woods into central and northern Louisiana Tuesday afternoon. And it could even begin as early as 1 to 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon. And then it looks like Wednesday, Central Gulf Coast, New Orleans into the Central Gulf Coast, Florida Panhandle on Thursday. I'm going to be activating Storm Chase mode coming into Dallas tonight, and I will have the option of heading northwest toward northwest Texas, southeastern Texas Panhandle for your 9-10 p.m. toward midnight severe weather potential up there, or I could just position out near the Sabine River 1-2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Prefrontal confluence lines are just going to be factories of those renegade supercells. You can see hints at them setting up there with bubbling super showers. And look at those, develop those renegade prefrontal supercell storms that develop from the very complex terrain of the Texas Piney Woods into central and northern Louisiana with time. This is all isotropic lift here, warm conveyor belt, low-level jet off the western Gulf of Mexico. You get those super showers that will develop, but that low-level jet also contributes to extreme low-level wind shear available to these storms. So let me show you the instability that's streaming northward. This is also the HRRR model, and there is remarkable agreement with the convective allowing models on the evolution of this system. But this is surface-based instability. That's going to be tomorrow and tonight. Look at this moisture return that's happening. Southern high plains. You get surface-based instability that comes together of the eastern Texas Panhandle. Then it evaporates before it reaches the Oklahoma City metro. You have a little nose of instability that goes through the DFW metroplex, and then increased instability as the elevated mix layer goes over top that warm sector in central and northern Louisiana. Look at that little warm sector pitches off over the Mississippi River Valley. Looks like my internet's still running. But this nose of instability up into the DFW area about 7 or 8 in the morning. There is a chance that there could be a tornado potential about 7 or 8 a.m. near the DFW area. Keep an eye on that. If you live in the DFW metroplex, set your alarm for about 5 a.m. if I were you. Keep an eye on that severe weather that's going to be approaching from the west in a squall line type of a configuration. Wouldn't be surprised if there are a couple of tornado warnings about 7 or 8 in the morning near DFW. And then as that line pushes off to the southeast, see that orientation of the front? Bam! There's the prefrontal confluence lines near the Sabine River, central and northern Louisiana. And right near the nose of that instability, it goes just up to the Interstate 20 corridor. Doesn't make it up into central or southern Arkansas like we saw previously. Looked like we were going to have a much larger warm sector some days ago, but now it's kind of consolidated across the Texas Piney Woods, central and northern Louisiana, Tuesday afternoon and evening, pushing eventually over toward the Monroe area. But we're going to be looking at forecast soundings too. But look at those prefrontal confluence lines, factories of supercell storms. And they're probably going to be developing initially in the Texas Piney Woods, between Longview and the Houston area. That's where these are going to develop starting at about 1 to 2 p.m. And then all these renegades are just going to rip northeast into central and northern Louisiana. And I'm going to be all over them streaming live. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you like immersive in-field coverage. Doing it for like 25 years, ever since I got my driver's license. Still ripping tornado intercepts to this day in my prime. But watch this area down here, eastern Texas Panhandle, definitely could be an eruption of supercell storms, and we're going to be breaking that down, of course. I also do want to discuss the cold side of this system before we take a really deep dive into the severe weather. This is the latest GFS model, and it's going to be a really close call for downtown Denver, down in this blob. There is a blizzard warning down there because of the winds. You're going to have 50 to 60 mile an hour winds. There's nothing like covering these Great Plains blizzards because the wind just rips right across the terrain. There's nothing to slow down the wind. It's similar to covering a hurricane from a coastal location when the wind comes right off the water. There's a big difference when you're chasing a hurricane, whether you're right on the coastline like we were on the southern tip of Pine Island for Hurricane Ian, or if you're a couple miles inland. It feels like a Category 1 hurricane sometimes. Much weaker if you go inland and you get surface roughness. It's difficult to push those strong winds all the way down to the ground. Same thing goes out here for these Great Plains blizzards. Not a lot to stop the flow. Unless you're in the mountains up here in Deadwood, then sometimes the surface roughness of the Black Hills can act to mitigate some of the winds. The worst blizzard conditions are going to be from the northern Nebraska Panhandle into central South Dakota, just on the east side of the Black Hills, where those easterly winds are going to be going up the terrain, squeezing out that moisture. Rapid City to Murdo, up toward Pierre. Someone in there is going to get 2 feet of snow, 60 mile an hour winds, drifts several feet high. It's a big issue for the ranchers out there. Cattle will get snowed in. A lot of times the ranchers will lose cattle out there. The days after these blizzards, they have to go out there and dig them all out again. But a lot of times this time of year, especially in recent years, you have to decide between chasing the cold side and the blizzard conditions, or do you chase the warm sector? I grew up in a lake effect snow belt, and actually the first ever storm that I ever chased when I was 16 years old was a lake effect snow event downwind of Lake Michigan, south of Grand Rapids. Nearly lost my vehicle down there. So I've chased snow my whole entire life, several years of covering snow in the 2010s. And I just can't really quite handle the cold temperatures quite as well. I can't stand out in the polar vortices as long as I used to be able to. So now I gravitate a bit toward the warm sector, but tornadoes have always kind of been my heart and soul, warm sectors, but I've also chased winter weather my whole career, hurricanes, atmospheric river events, lake effect snowstorms, flash floods, front walls, you name it. We've chased it. But it's going to be a very close call for downtown Denver on the western edge of that deformation zone. Look at the minimum in snow, though, for the Colorado foothills. Normally, when you get a Colorado low, you get that prolonged upslope and you'll get feet of snow that'll dump in the Colorado foothills. But that's when you get prolonged upslope flow. And in this case, the Colorado low develops, lifts off to the northeast. Those winds shift to a northwesterly direction down the foothills. That's a drying wind direction for the Colorado foothills and downtown Denver, and you get a lot more upslope further north as that low ejects off to the northeast. It's not the perfect trough ejection either for severe weather. If you get a tandem trough ejection or a little bit more of a subtropical connection, then the trough can maintain that amplitude, punch out of the southeastern Great Plains and into Dixie Alley, and you get those much larger warm sectors. This one's kind of lifting up to the northern plains, and we still are able to pull up some instability off the western Gulf of Mexico, and we're still able to squeeze out a severe weather event. And as I mentioned, it all depends on the exact track of that Colorado low. Colorado low. There it is. There you can see the low. Initially it develops near Denver and then deepens a little bit south of Denver back near the Palmer Divide, and that's when you're going to get a little shot of some upslope, maybe an inch or two of snow in Denver, and then the thing lifts up into northwestern Kansas, brings the northwesterly winds around on the backside, but look at that deformation zone on the cold side of that system. The tighter the isobars are on the backside of that surface low, the stronger the winds. And that's why you're going to get big blizzard conditions. Central South Dakota back toward northeastern Colorado, cold side of that system. Squall line, though, pinches off. It's almost like a roping out tornado where the vortices occlude up here, your tornado ropes out, and then you get a new tornado that might form further off to the southeast. That's where your tornado outbreak's going to happen, but you almost get a decoupling on the synoptic scale. It's incredible the similarities that you see from the real small tornado scale up to the synoptic scale with these systems. Basically, you've got a roping out tornado there, but cold air on the backside. But as I mentioned, there are tornado probabilities tonight. I do think that these are going to be decreased. I got to look at the latest SPC still. I think that these are still 5%. But the moisture that's going all the way up into northwestern Kansas, you're going to be talking about low 40s dew points up here. Could you get a tornado about 9, 10, 11 p.m. in northwestern Kansas, just to the east of that surface low that's going to be in eastern Colorado with really favorable kinematics? We'll break down some of the stable air at the low levels there throughout this warm sector. But then you have mid-50s dew point streaming northward into the eastern Texas Panhandle with much more favorable thermodynamics and also some decent wind fields. Kinematics are the wind fields, thermodynamics, the heat and the moisture at the low levels are dry air aloft. Notice, though, how there is a non-zero tornado threat all the way into the Oklahoma City metro, including Norman. It's a 2% tornado threat. I think that the storms are going to run out of the instability axis by the time they reach there, but as you're transitioning to more of a QLCS regime, you can never rule out a tornado in Norman. Used to be there was a hole for tornadoes there. We'd always call it the Norman hole, and you just wouldn't get any tornadoes in Norman. Recently now that's changed, probably since about 2014 when that tornado tore through the Jason's Deli in Norman. I missed that tornado, unfortunately. I was on a storm just to the southwest of it. I used to go to Jason's Deli every single day for lunch as a creature of habit. But then once the tornado destroyed the Jason's Deli, I never went back after that since 2014. And the Norman hole, the Norman bubble, if you will, became myth. And you actually do get tornadoes in the Norman bubble. So I'm going to be using a lot of the windy.com app too. I highly recommend the windy.com app. There you can see it. It's an amazing app. We've talked with their developers out of the Czech Republic, and they're also adding a bunch of new stuff for severe weather here in North America. So we're going to be using this app a lot during chasing. You can visualize the wind fields. Look at these northerly winds off California. You got winter storm warnings over the mountains of Southern California. You've got southerly flow here, moisture transport happening, temperature 52 degrees there in Oklahoma City, pushing 70 in Houston. But you've got that flow right off the western Gulf of Mexico. And there's also a lot of moisture down in the western Gulf too. Let me show you some of that moisture down there. This is the HRRR model, but look at those 70s dew points just sitting off the Texas coastline. You have got to be kidding me with that. Move my head a little bit. There it is. Look at those 70s dew points surging northward out of the western Gulf of Mexico. We're going to be talking upper 60s dew points. And the NAM model kind of had this dominance of stable air over central Louisiana. The HRRR has gotten rid of that, thankfully. Not thankfully, but I believe that was an error. But you've got these deep dew points, low to mid 70s dew points just sitting over the western Gulf of Mexico. Similar to a year ago, preceding the December 10 and 11, 2021 outbreak, you basically have a high pressure from the Gulf of Mexico that sometimes will extend into the southeastern U.S. We've been just north of it this year. It's a little bit further south than it's been in previous years. But that gentle southerly flow over the Gulf of Mexico will maintain this reservoir of deep moisture. But storms could initiate tomorrow relatively early, 19Z even, 18, 19Z. Might even have a little moisture funneling right up the Sabine River. But as I mentioned, this is on the tail end of the low-level jet. So the main low-level jet axis goes all the way north into the northern plains. It's the warm conveyor belt that's going to be feeding that blizzard over the northern plains from northeastern Colorado into central South Dakota. But down here along the tail of the low-level jet, even though it weakens down to about 45 knots, and even though it is parallel to the frontal boundary, you're able to squeeze out an environment that's going to be quite conducive for strong to potentially violent tornadoes across that zone. You get a lot of directional shear. You get these prefrontal confluence lines that will develop across the Texas Piney Woods. This is the main front. You could have tornadic supercells embedded with that again. Tyler, Longview area, back further south. I think a lot of it's going to be I-20 and just to the south. Skinny squall line north across Arkansas, reduced instability further north. But these prefrontal confluence lines are a big issue from Houston up through the Sabine River. These are going to be tornado-producing machines as they lift off to the northeast. That's going to be the main event from the Sabine River. Look at that one, just to the south of Shreveport. They move off these because there's a lot of westerly flow aloft in the middle and upper troposphere. The lead prefrontal confluence line could be out near Alexandria by about 3 p.m. even. And you're probably going to have dangerous supercell storms moving off of these prefrontal confluence lines. Look at that. Just one after another. They're going to be moving off of these prefrontal confluence lines, likely producing tornadoes. We look at a forecast sounding here, and look at that. Plenty of surface-based instability available to these storms. Temperatures in the low 70s, dew points in the upper 60s. You get a little bit of a dry slot coming in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, helping to steepen the lapse rates too. You get a lot of CAPE. And there's your 50-knot low-level jet that develops. And that bulges the hodograph up. Look at the hodograph. You got a southerly surface wind at about 10 knots. You've got a south-southwesterly low-level jet at about 45 knots, and that creates bulk shear in the 0 to 1 kilometer layer in excess of 30 knots. And you've got a manageable storm motion, 30 knots, due northeast. That creates critical angles that are close to 70 degrees, 65, 70 degrees. If that angle is near 90 degrees, then you have pure streamwise vorticity coming in at the low levels. And you also have plenty of bulk shear to evacuate the rain and the hail from the rotating updraft. A lot of times when these setups are less robust and you don't have that massive mega outbreak that's happening, sometimes these will end up going bigger from a storm chasing perspective and from a tornado perspective. And as we're getting to 6 p.m., look at this 50-knot low-level jet ripping out of the Texas Piney Woods up into central Louisiana. That's an environment that's going to create dangerous conditions for tornadic storms. Right on the nose of that low-level jet is where you'd want to target. Compact, more compact than your traditional Dixie Alley hodograph. A lot of times, your traditional Dixie Alley hodograph, like the one a year ago, the December 10 and 11 outbreak in Kentucky, you just have this nasty-looking hodograph like that. Sometimes when they're a bit more compact like this, slower storm motions too, 30 knots, you're still generating a lot of torque within that storm. A storm embedded within this environment from a storm relative sense, taking in a lot of storm relative inflow in the lowest kilometer. I wonder if these could be more HP storms. It seems like they're not going to be as ventilated as some of those setups like a year ago, the December 10 and 11 outbreak 2021, but it doesn't matter. They're still going to be capable of producing strong to potentially violent tornadoes across that zone. Looking at your significant tornado parameter. And you can even see the prefrontal confluence lines within parameters like the STP or the EHI, Energy Helicity Index. You can see how they line up within these bands. And this is the lead prefrontal confluence line into central Louisiana by about 6 p.m. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up focusing near Alexandria. I think that this west to east road through central Louisiana, probably from Lufkin area or northeast of Lufkin across central Louisiana, appears to be a favorable target. And boy, very favorable setup. A lot of surface space instability, a ton of CAPE. Looking at some of these numbers, you're pushing 1,500 CAPE, SRH in excess of 300. You can read those numbers along the bottom. There's your shear storm relative helicity numbers. All of those are greater than 300. And that's because you have this very strongly curved hodograph. A lot of directional shear from the surface with a south-southeasterly wind to your low-level jet, which is south-southwest at about 50 knots. And then your 500 winds due west in the middle and upper troposphere. That's the key here, is that directional shear. And a lot of times that doesn't happen in those traditional Dixie Alley outbreak setups. And that's why I think that this is a bit more of a hybrid setup, but you kind of have a pinched off warm sector down here across the Mid-South. By about 7 to 8 p.m., that lead confluence line is going to be getting closer to the Mississippi River near Vicksburg area. Monroe could have tornadic supercells near it. And that's your lead confluence line, but the front also will have some tornado potential. The good news for Arkansas is it does look like you're going to be socked more into the stable there, central and eastern Arkansas, but these prefrontal confluence line approaching the Mississippi River, but running out of instability by about 8 or 9 p.m. Those are going to have the potential of producing tornadoes too. But there's your front It's all about those prefrontal confluence lines with a setup like this. Going back to about 2 p.m. That's when these prefrontal confluence lines are just really going to be rocking. Even the 3-kilometer NAM is suggesting that dominant prefrontal confluence line and maybe a mode of tail end Charlie storms here over the Texas Piney Woods. The 3-kilometer NAM doesn't seem to be as good at resolving those confluence lines as the HRRR model, though. Notice that. You just don't get the prefrontal confluent storms, the renegade storms with the 3-kilometer NAM. So we're going to throw it out. It could be because on a synoptic scale, you're kind of getting a glancing below. And the main kinematics and main lift up toward the central U.S., even up toward the northern plains. And you kind of have a glancing below in terms of the synoptics. But it does look like it's a bit more muddy here with your upper level flow on the 3-kilometer NAM. Some of the WRF models, it does seem to have a hint at prefrontal confluence, but boy, the NAM models, the WRF models, not surprisingly, they do agree, but they more show the frontal boundary dominating as you get toward 4 or 5 o'clock. But still down here across the Texas Piney Woods looks like the hot spot according to that high resolution model. That's why the HRRR is a pretty valuable model. Just look at the difference that the resolution provides, lighting up those prefrontal confluence lines. And also, the HRRR is better at resolving surface temperature, surface heat that will happen. All right, we'll look at the updraft helicity tracks. This is late night tonight. It shows a supercell moving from the eastern Texas Panhandle and through northwestern Oklahoma. Maybe we'll get a couple tornado warnings out of these. Another track of supercells from the southeastern Texas Panhandle into west central Oklahoma. This is the morning mode. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this briefing, if you live in the DFW Metroplex, watch out. Like 6, 7, 8 in the morning as this line moves through. The HRRR is showing kind of an uptick with the arrival of those mid-60s dew points. This one could be a tornado producer even. Starts west of Dallas, maybe out near Abilene, just west of the DFW Metroplex. And then this is the event, the enhanced risk event with the potential for strong, even violent tornadoes. And it looks to be focused over the Texas Piney Woods and into central Louisiana. So from a storm chaser perspective, you want to figure out how to cover this in Dallas and this, and even the nocturnal event. Of course, you want to chase everything as a storm chaser, but you kind of have to pick and choose a little bit. And I forecast ceilings more so, and I do think that the threat of potential high-end tornadoes is down there with those helicity tracks from the Texas Piney Woods into central Louisiana. But don't rule out the threat of a tornado. Tomorrow morning, 6, 7, 8 in the morning, near the DFW Metroplex into southern Oklahoma. I do want to look too at the snowfall in Denver, and let's see what the NAM shows just for fun, the morning NAM. I'm looking at these in real time. So the NAM has Denver hardly getting anything, and it all depends on how quickly this surface low ejects, but it's definitely not an ideal track for the foothills or for Denver to get hammered. Out over northeastern Colorado, though, you could even get double-digit snowfall totals up there. Deformation zone comes together, but really blossoms as you get up toward the northern Nebraska Panhandle into central South Dakota. You could even be pushing 2 feet somewhere to the east of the Black Hills. And then you go up toward the Black Hills, and you kind of have that shadow, almost a precipitation shadow with the northeasterly winds. You get a lot more upslope. You get squeezing out of the moisture to the east of the Black Hills. But downwind of the Black Hills, you get a little bit of a hole. because northeast winds force up the mountains and then subsidence on the backside. Areas like Newcastle, Hill City, southwest of the Black Hills could get a hole. But if I were chasing the blizzard portion of this, I'd want to be in the Pine Ridge area, Murdo, up toward Pierre. Somewhere in central South Dakota is the place to go. Maybe even up toward Jamestown in North Dakota, but somewhere is going to get a couple of feet of snow into central South Dakota. Blizzard conditions up there. Blizzard warnings are going to be in place. Look at the GFS model. It brings that gradient on the western edge of the deformation zone right into downtown Denver. GFS has Denver getting an inch or two of snow. Airport gets 8 inches of snow out near the airport. Big wind too, 50-mile-an-hour winds. Could even get some double-digit snowfall totals across northeastern Colorado. But it all depends. So much drama when you're trying to run your own operation. So it all depends on the exact location of the surface low. And boy, we got strong agreement with the GFS model. Bringing that surface low just to the south of Denver. There's the Denver airport. If this surface low were a little bit further south down across this area, then you'd be trending up for downtown Denver. If a couple of these southern members end up verifying, that'll bring the western gradient right into downtown, and you'll get an inch or two, 8 inches though, potentially near the Denver International Airport. If some of these northern surface low tracks verify, this is this evening at 0Z, some of these northern ones verify, that'll mean even less for the Denver airport. But boy, then the GFS pushes it all the way east into northwest Kansas by midnight tonight, and that brings the northwesterly flow, but it looks like you still have northeasterly winds into Denver. That'll still keep that deformation zone right at the airport, but you're right at the gradient. But pretty strong agreement on the surface low track from just south of Denver into northwest Kansas, eventually to south central Nebraska. That's by Tuesday morning midday into central Nebraska, 989, 986. Big clustering of those, and that'll bring the blizzard conditions into the Nebraska Panhandle. And you might even get some thunder snow tonight in the Nebraska Panhandle with this one. There could be the thunder snow late night tonight at around midnight into the Nebraska Sandhills up near Shadron. You definitely got convection here. Boy, that pivoting of the low due east into northwestern Kansas will definitely shut off the snow in the Denver area, but that's when your deformation zone gets going. The HRRR has those bands just a little bit east out over the high plains of Colorado. This is by the early morning hours on Tuesday. There's that surface low moving out of northwest Kansas into the southwest corner of Nebraska. A ton of banding, convection happening. This is by Tuesday morning. And it does look like that heavy snow also moves into the southern Nebraska Panhandle, northeastern Colorado. That's by Tuesday morning. Nebraska Sandhills are getting hammered. Northeastern Colorado gets hammered as you go through. Look at that conveyor belt of moisture on the north side of the surface low. There's your rain snow line right in Cherry County by tomorrow morning. That's your cold side of the system. So I'm going to be activating storm chase mode. We do have tornado probabilities tonight, of course, across western Kansas, down into the southeastern Texas Panhandle to western Oklahoma and northwestern Texas. I do want to break down the tornado threat tonight too, so let me show you that as well here on this model, the HRRR, and we'll also look at some of the surface-based instability. So here is the convection tonight, and it starts off at about 9 p.m. initially with this likely elevated storm up near Goodland, northwestern Kansas. That's going to be at about 9 p.m. tonight. And then everything erupts. By 10 p.m., you start to get another cluster down near Dodge City. You get another cluster over the eastern Texas Panhandle. And then a full explosion across the eastern Texas Panhandle. This storm is the one that I'd be watching, Clarendon down toward Childress. But also this storm that comes out near Canadian up across northwest Oklahoma has a pretty well-defined updraft helicity track. In terms of the dew points, you do get 50 dew points that go almost up to Garden City. North of there, though, you've got 40s dew points up toward Goodland by about late evening, getting close to the midnight hour. Will that be enough to get a tornado up there? I don't think so, but it could happen because just east of that surface low, you get very strong low-level wind shear. But down across the eastern Texas Panhandle, you got dew points 56, mid-60s, mid-50s, even some upper 50s down near Childress. That's definitely enough to generate some surface-based instability. And even that forecast sounding. Even despite that, you still do have that stable air at the surface. See that with those temperatures in the upper 50s? But almost, if you can get a strong mesocyclone, it'll be capable of drilling through that shallow, stable air and potentially producing a tornado. That's definitely a shallow enough stable air at the low levels. And your hodograph is supportive of a tornado, despite this little weakness here at the 3-kilometer layer, some negative helicity that works in there. That has basically been shown to be more irrelevant in that layer. And really what's more important is that strong low-level wind shear with your 1-kilometer wind pushing 50 knots. There's your low-level jet southwesterly. Some elevated cape up there too that can get an elevated supercell get going. But that's going to be, if this were timed properly, then this would be a big event. But it's coming into the middle of the night. You're in the winter. Usually the high plains don't go big this time of year, but it's possible that you could get enough moisture and enough heat, especially this storm kind of on the northern edge of those middle and upper 50s dew points that moves out of the Canadian area into northwestern Oklahoma. That has the potential of producing a tornado. Some of these that develop out of the southeastern Texas Panhandle and move into Oklahoma do. But really, toward tomorrow morning near DFW, I'm more concerned about this environment for tornado potential tomorrow morning, right at the nose. You get the arrival of those mid-60s dew points just in time for that line before it moves through Dallas. You might get some embedded supercells in there. You get about 1,000 CAPE, and the HRRR model is suggesting that there could even be some supercells embedded within that portion of the line. And your hodographs are not unfavorable right there. You got a little hook-shaped hodograph. This is also a great tool to visualize where the low-level wind shear overlaps surface-based instability. And right at the nose of that instability, that's a very favorable hodograph for tornadoes near DFW. I mean, look at that thing. That's actually the best hodograph that we've seen yet during this entire briefing. Southwest to northeast storm motion at 35 knots. Elevated mix layer coming in. Decent surface-based instability, 64, 65. Temperatures mid-60s, dew points into the mid-60s. Watch out. And you got your 50-knot low-level jet. And you're talking greater than 300 storm relative helicity in the 0 to 1 layer, 0 to 3 layer. So DFW, Dallas, Fort Worth, I wouldn't be surprised if you get a tornado tomorrow morning. And we may want to figure out how to chase this as well instead of just waiting down here in the Sabine River, getting a good night's sleep. But eventually this all lifts northward, and as we go toward 20Z, watch how quickly that environment comes together in Louisiana with very favorable hodographs near that Sabine River down into the Texas Piney Woods. You get close to 2,000 CAPE. Warm front starting to knock on the door of Alexandria by about the middle of the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, that warm front lifts to the northeast through central Louisiana. A little bit of a nose in the instability up to Shreveport. Warm front blows through Alexandria and brings a very favorable environment by about 5 to 6 p.m. into central Louisiana. Wow. Wow. So thank you everybody for tuning into this weather report, this live update. Hit that notification bell, hit the subscribe button. I'm going to be activating storm chase mode all day tomorrow. And then I'm headed out to the Flex Seal holiday party. So that'll be exciting. Heading out to the Flex Seal holiday party out in Florida. It's possible that there could be a tornado potential in northwest Florida or the Florida Panhandle on Thursday too, that we got to keep a close eye on it. Yeah, the Dominators are going to get rolling again. That's our plan. We've got to get the Dominators back out there. Hello, everybody in the chat. Yeah, everything happens fast. Thank you, members, too. Thank you, James. Thank you, Elias Hurricane, Wayne Parker, Cray Cray, the G. Jason, Briar Rose, David Carter, Vanessa A. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Reed Dusterman. Hello, fellow Reed. Anybody named Reed out there has a fast track to becoming a moderator on here, of course. Reeds are very trustworthy, especially the double E. Never stop flexing. Thank you, Cray Cray. Oh yeah, look at the Windy app. You could zoom in and look at all the temperatures in real time. I'm going to be using this a lot when I'm storm chasing. You look at dew point. Let's monitor the dew point progression. Look at that. We've already got a 53 dew point in the Memphis area, 57 in Lamesa. You've got 60 of 59 in Dallas already. And look at new snow accumulation out here. Look at all the snow that could potentially fall out. It looks like Flagstaff's going to be getting in on the snow action. You got snow across western Colorado. Weather radar. There's your snowfall that's happening. Western Colorado across the higher terrain. Just fantastic visualizations on the windy.com app. We're going to be using this a lot more. And look at that moisture return right off the western Gulf of Mexico. You can almost see the trough over the western U.S. But we'll be using this during the chase too. Flip out over to the HRRR model, and there you've got your Cape. You've got Cape in southern Texas. Your warm front lifting through the Beeville area right now. Southeasterly winds transporting that surface base instability northward. Moisture's not going to be an issue for this setup tomorrow. Weird little vortex down there over the central Gulf. So thank you everybody for joining this live weather report. I've got to get ready to head into the warm sector, get my chase going. We're going to get the Dominators back out there. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, David Carter. Ms. Vicky, thank you. Never stop chasing, everybody. Don't forget that. Doesn't have to be a storm, but as long as you're passionate about it and it does good, doesn't hurt anybody, then it's a great thing to chase. Thank you, everybody. Have a good Monday. Never stop chasing.